As a website developer, there'll be times when you want to see the code behind your website and probably edit little bits and pieces, maybe make a few little customizations. For example, on this test site of mine, we have some links in the opening paragraph, and the way this theme works is that it doesn't underline the links, it just changes the color. And we also have a hover effect where the color is changed when you hover your mouse over. I might decide I want to change that, and although the theme settings don't allow me to do it within the theme itself, I can always add custom CSS, but I'd need to know about the CSS and the code behind this website. Fortunately for us, Google Chrome web browser has all the tools we need built right into it. To call up the developer tools, you can press a shortcut. If you're on Windows, you can press F12. You can also press Control-Shift-C. If you're on a Mac, it's Command-Shift-C or Command-Option-C. So to show you what these tools look like, let me press F12 on my browser, and there you can see the tools now over on the right hand side. Just quickly, we'll go through the interface. We've got some tabs across the top here. We have Elements, Console, Source, Network. We have Performance, Memory, Application, Security, and Audits as well. The Elements is the most important one for us in this tutorial because it's the one that will allow us to see the HTML, which is shown in this top box, and the CSS, which is shown down below for our web pages. And that gives us the power to make little changes and see what happens, as you'll see in the next lecture. I always have the developer tools over here pinned to the right side of my browser, but if you click on the little menu button here, you can pin them to the left if you prefer, or you can pin them to the bottom, or in fact you can unpin them altogether so they appear in their own window, which is quite useful if you are using a wide monitor and you want to have a bit more real estate to view your web page. For now, I'm going to pin mine back to the right where I like them. You can also increase the width, or if it's pinned to the bottom, you can increase and decrease the height. The other thing that is useful with these tools is you can see what your website will look like in different size browsers. So this toggle device button up here, we can see the website displayed. At the moment it's set to responsive, so I can drag this out and check to make sure my website is responsive and see what happens to the sidebar when it gets too small. There it is, it's just gone down to the bottom. I can also select individual devices, so if I want to see what this will look like on an iPad Pro, I can do that. I can see what it would look like on a Pixel 2 XL phone, Samsung S5, and so on. And then when you want to get back to the normal view, just click that button again and we're taken back here. For me though, the real power of these tools is the way that it can show me the code that is responsible for this website. This is the HTML over on the right hand side at the top, this is the CS down below, but I can pinpoint individual elements on my page, for example this headline if I want to, and I can select that and inspect the code just behind that headline. If I right click on the headline and go down to inspect, then you can see that the HTML over here has jumped to the HTML that is responsible for that headline. And in the bottom, this is the CSS that is relevant to the selected HTML code. Let's try that again. I'm going to inspect this image. So right click on the image, click on inspect, and then we have, let me open this up a little bit because that's quite a big chunk of HTML. We have the HTML that's responsible for, let me just drag it a little bit so the image comes back. We have the HTML that is responsible for this image. And then the CSS down below that is relevant to this image. And we've also got the box model here, which shows me the dimensions of the image, 192 by 192, whether there's any padding, a border, and margin, and those don't have values at the moment, so there's no padding, no border, no margin. Underneath here you can see this is the CSS, the code that is relevant to the box model, and you can see that's all the code that is relevant to that particular image. So you can select individual elements by right clicking and inspect, but there are other ways to inspect the elements as well. If you want to, you can click this little button up here, select an element on the page and inspect it, and then when you move your mouse over the web page you can see it will start to highlight elements of the page. So if I was interested in working on, let's say, this menu, I can move my mouse over there, click on that to inspect it, and we can have a look at the code behind that. If you don't quite get the bit that you want, let's move right over the menu, and I'm going to move my mouse out a little bit. You can see we've now grabbed a little bit more. So you can then select that and see if that's the code that you want. So we can see here this is a button type, button, the class, menu toggle, main header menu toggle, and then a little bit more there to the class and the HTML for that, and then the CSS underneath. So that's the second way you can choose elements on the page. The final thing you can do is you can just work directly in the HTML screen up here and move your mouse throughout the HTML, and as you move your mouse around that HTML, different elements are going to be selected in the preview screen, and you can select those elements just by clicking on the HTML. You can see I've just clicked on main header bar wrap, so we're talking about this section up at the top, and I can keep going down. This is the code for the menu. You can see the menu is now selected, and keep scrolling down a little bit. There's the main content. You can see that that class site content has selected the whole of the content of the article, and we should be able to select, there's the header section, we should be able to get the sidebar, there's the entry content, and keep going down. We're now over in the sidebar. There's the sidebar main section over there, and we can just finish off the bottom of this page. There's the image that we saw, so I can select that as well through there. So those are the main ways in which you can inspect the elements. In the next lecture, we're going to have a look at some practical ways in which you can use this information to make changes to your website. In this video, I want to have a look at how you can use the developer tools to tweak your design. Now, the first thing you can do, let's inspect the title element. The first thing you can do is you can actually change the text and the content on the preview screen. So I can go up here, I've selected the H1 header, I can double click on the text section of the headline and type in my own headline. When I press return, you can see the preview window has now closed. Now all I'm affecting is this local view over here. I'm not affecting the real website. And that's a good job, because if you could affect the website that easily, then people could go in and change your website. But all we're doing is changing the local copy so that we can see what it looks like, so we know what we want to do on our real website that is live on the internet. If I refresh this screen, let me just drag this down. If I click on the refresh, you'll see the headline changes back to the real headline. But where this is useful is if you think, well, maybe my headline is a little bit too big or a little bit too small. You can select the element, and then the size of the headline is controlled down here in the CSS. So we can have a look. This font size, it says 2 rem. Now, if you use the up-down arrow keys, you can increase and decrease that value. So I can move it up and say, right, that's 5 rem. And what size do I really want? So you can test and you can see what it looks like before it goes live on your website. Let's have a look at the other CSS responsible for the way my headline looks. So we have font weight. Now if I highlight the font weight, I can't use the up and down arrow keys, but what I can do is I could put in a different font weight and say, let's make it a bit stronger. What if font weight was 800? And then I can see an immediate reflection over here on this side. Let's go down and say, well, what if I wanted this headline a different color? Now the color of the headline is controlled by this CSS here, but this CSS also controls the color of the body text, which is the main text, and other bits and pieces. So if I go down here to the color and I go and click on the color, I can select another color, but it changes all the text on my page, and I might not want that. So let's refresh this. I'm going to go back and I'm going to inspect the title again and go down to where it says color here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class which will only affect this H1 header. So the way you do that, click to inspect, and then you can come up here to the little plus button and click on the plus. And what's happened here is it's created a new CSS class for the element that was selected. So now if I say color and then type in a color, it's only affected that headline. So I know then that this CSS here is the CSS I would need to add to my style sheet that is controlling the website. If I don't have the exact color, I can put in the closest color by using the name blue and then click on the little button there, and I can use the color wheels to choose the exact colors. Another thing I might like to do is have a look at what effect padding or border or margin might have on my header. So let's go over to the box model over here, and I'm going to double click inside the margin. This is the top margin. Let's click on the left margin, and I'll put in a value of 20 for that. And what you can see now is the heading has a space over on the left hand side which is equivalent to 20 pixels. If I increase that, let's say to 50, that space over there is going to increase. So I can play around with all the settings, and then when I know what looks good and what I want to keep, then I can move that across to the actual CSS file. Let's take a look at another example, and this is one I get asked about all the time. It's hyperlinks. You can see that this theme changes the color of hyperlinks. But if you're colorblind, you might find it quite difficult to spot the hyperlinks on this page. And so as a webmaster, you might decide, well, okay, I want to change these hyperlinks to make them more obvious. I could change the color to make it more obvious, or I could add an underline. Now, underlining in HTML and CSS is done with a text decoration CSS command. And if I select one of these hyperlinks, let's go over and inspect the CSS. And we can see down here that the hyperlink, which is defined by A and A focus, in other words, when it's got the focus, has text decoration of none. And up above that we have A hover, and A focus is the color. So let's start off with the A focus and change the text decoration to underline. What you can now see is that the links are underlined. However, when I move my mouse over to hover over the link, the underline disappears, which you may or may not want. The thing is that the text decoration underline is only affecting hyperlinks and links that have focus. It doesn't affect links that have hover. But what we could do is we could actually add that CSS command as well, and then we should be able to keep the underline when we hover. So how would I make this change permanent on my site? Because this change that I've made in the CSS is just on my local copy. If I refresh the screen, then it's going to be reverting back to the original CSS. All I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to copy it. Let's just refresh the page, and you can see now if we inspect the element that the text decoration has gone back to none. But I've copied the CSS. And here it is pasted into Notepad. If I go into my site, let's go to Customize. Most themes allow you to add custom CSS, and that's what we're going to do. I'm going to close this window down for now. And you can see in this particular theme, we've got it here at the bottom, additional CSS. And all I want to do is I want to paste in my additional CSS, and we'll publish. And let's just close this down. And you can see now that the hyperlinks are underlined. One thing though I've noticed is that the title up here, the site title, is also underlined. That's because that is also a hyperlink. So we need to fix that. Let's go back to our developer tools. I'm going to inspect that element, inspect that element, and look at the CSS for the site title. And at the top here we've got site title, hyperlink, which is the A. All I'm going to do is have a look and see what happens if I go text decoration :none. And you can see now we've removed the hyperlink from that section. So again, I will copy this little bit of CSS, go back to the Customize, back to the additional CSS, and I'm going to paste it in. Now this color was already in there in the text, so we don't need to change that. All I want to do is to change the text decoration to none, and then we can save that, close it down, and you can see we've got the underlined text links in the body, but the underline on the site title is no longer there. What I would then do is go through the rest of my site and see if there were any other areas where underlines have been added where I don't really want them. For example, I might decide I don't want them in this menu, but again I would inspect the element, create the CSS that I want, and then insert it as additional CSS to my theme. I hope you're starting to see the power of these developer tools, but I want to show you another case where it has saved my bacon on more than one occasion. I'm going to log out to my test site, and here I am on the login screen, and your browser can remember usernames and passwords. The problem is that the password usually is hidden and you can't see what the password is. You may not have a record of it, and you might need to know what that password is. Fortunately, with the developer tools, we can use those to find what the password is. So let's open the developer tools, and I'm going to inspect the password element. It's gone down to inspect. You couldn't see it on the screen there. And then go over to the code over here in the HTML, and it says input type password, name, password, ID. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to change that type from password to text. And then you can see that the password is then visible. So there's another good way in which developer tools can help you if you've forgotten passwords. So finally then, there's a couple more things I want to show you before we finish this overview of the developer tools. The first one is the security tab, which if you click on it, it will give you a rundown or an overview of how secure your page is. So I can see this page is secure, valid HTTPS. There is a valid and trusted certificate, and I can even see the certificate by clicking on the button. Connection, secure connection settings, and it gives me some details there. And then resources all serve securely. So if you're struggling with valid HTTPS or you're getting insecure content on your web page, you can go and look at the security tab, and it could give you some more clues as to what's wrong. The last thing I want to show you, and we're not going to go into any detail, I just want to show you what it is the audits tab. And you can run an audit. Let's choose a new audit for a simulation of somebody coming from a mobile device or coming from a desktop device. To show you this, I'll type in a URL of a real website, not the demo website I've been using, and we'll do a desktop simulation, no throttling, so it's simulating a fast 3G connection, 4 times CPU slowdown. Let's run the audits. And once it's finished, you'll get some results through. So we have performance, 90 is good, accessibility, best practices, and SEO value of a score of 96. Obviously, the higher these numbers, the better. You can scroll down and see what the different metrics are. Let me just widen this view a little bit. Oops, wrong thing. There we go. If you move your mouse over to any of these, it will give you a little bit more information. So first, contentful paint marks the time at which the first text or image is painted onto the page. Time to interact, that's basically the full load time. So for this page it was 3.9 seconds. And you can scroll down and see lots of other information. Opportunities, these are things that you can do to improve. So eliminate render blocking resources, and we can have a look at the render blocking resources down here. Remove unused CSS. And we can get some information down here about CSS that's not being used. And then you have some diagnostics, plus also the audits that have been passed. As I said, we're not going through what all of this means. It's just more an FYI so that you know it's there if you want to have a second opinion about anything on your site and how Google sees it. So that's the Google developer tools. They are really, really useful, especially for minor tweaking of your site design. To finish this section on developer tools, I want to show you an alternative to the Google Chrome developer tools. There used to be a plugin called Firebug which worked with Firefox, and you can still see a link to it here, Get Firebug. But if you go to the site, you'll see that the Firebug plugin is no longer available, and basically Firefox has been upgraded to a special developer version that you can download. So Firefox Developer Edition, once you download and install it, looks a bit like this. In fact, it looks exactly like this at the moment anyway. And I can use the same shortcuts, so F12, to bring up the Firefox developer tools, and they look almost identical to the Google tools. I can right click and inspect an element, get the code over here and inspect the CSS. And as you can see down here, text decoration underline, that's some CSS that we actually put in. And you can disable it the same way by unchecking boxes. Okay, so this is an alternative if you prefer using Firefox and don't want to use Google Chrome. Just be aware it is available. It's called Firefox Developer Edition.